2 against Ohio State. Of the 8 teams that are here, Nebraska only played 3 of them during the regular season. We welcome in our good friend from the World-Herald, Evan Bland. Good morning.
Good morning.
Hey, I want to start there. We got a lot of discussion about Nebraska baseball because this is the start of what'll be an interesting at least 2-week run of Big Ten tournament, then NCAA. Will sat down with Tom Chattel the other day, and Tom wrote about it this weekend. And you've written about Haymarket Park, either before beer sales, after beer sales, but also that ballpark is starting to show its age. I want to start with this question, and what's your reaction to this quote? Because Will was here when that ballpark opened. He's now the caretaker of that place. He said, I will say, quote, I will say this, all the guys who were on the 01, 02, 05 World Series teams were recruited to this ballpark, and that was 25 years ago. That was a big drawing point. This is the crown jewel of the Midwest. It's a powerful thing. This is what propelled things. Your opinion on how Will looks at his stadium and what he wants is what?
My opinion is that the on the field component is really good with the turf and the sight lines. Like if you're a fan and you're showing up, the experience is pretty strong, even more so now with alcohol sales. But I think it's the behind the scenes stuff that they would like to see an improvement on. The player development piece, that open spot there behind the left field side in foul ground, that like they would love to have some player development stuff out there. And by that's kind of a buzzword, right? Or buzz term, player development. But what that means is they want to be able to have like a little cafeteria out there. They want to be able to have their own weight training, strength training area out there. They want to be able to maybe have something in the realm of a pitching lab out there where guys can develop, where everything's centrally located. As it stands, Nebraska players have to drive across the bridge to Memorial Stadium for food. They have to go over there to the Hawks Center for an indoor practice, and that part would remain the same. But what they're looking for is a centralized development hub. And I think that's kind of the next step for this program, because as Will said, the attraction of what became Haymarket Park 25 years ago did draw some of those bigger crowds, and that jump started the golden age of Nebraska baseball and the sport. And it's sort of stagnated since that time. They have the Gordon facility, which is functional, but is, it's 15 years old. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's kind of the vision, is they want to find a way to really allow all of their player development stuff to be in one space and really catch up to be at least on equal footing with a lot of their contemporaries, at least in the Midwest.
How much of this season, Evan, because I know these types of movements to get improvement shouldn't be based on one season, but Will, also going back to that article with Tom, talking about what the standard should be with this program and being at the very least an NCAA tournament team, and you want to eventually get into that conversation about hosting. But how much of this season, Nebraska going to the postseason, both of the Big Ten tournament, more importantly the NCAA tournament, how much can that aid in Will Bolt's vision of having better facilities, better opportunities for their players, and better opportunities to recruit?
Well, I would have said a few years ago that they have some momentum and now they're going to get rolling, but they had a ton of momentum in 21 as well. Yep. And it didn't really turn into anything. They didn't even make the Big Ten tournament a year later. Nothing really changed. I think the difference now is at the top. I think, I've talked to Troy Dannon about Haymarket, and he's motivated to see some improvements there. So I think that's a starting point. And I think also their relationship with the Salt Dogs has evolved even in the last 5 or 6 months. You saw how they were able to figure out a deal to get alcohol sales done, so both sides could benefit. I think you'll probably see something similar, whether that's in the next year or two, or both of these sides are able to find some common ground with some different leadership, with some maybe different starting points for negotiations. I think there's too much benefit for Nebraska to continue to do nothing. If they have to concede some of their space to the Salt Dogs on the other side, I think they'll do it. It's going to cost some money, obviously, and in this era of financial uncertainty, you don't want to go too overboard with that. But I do think there's motivation. One thing Troy Dannon told me that kind of stood out was, like, if you have a program that's successful, you want to invest further in that success. And I think that's the thing that Nebraska baseball has proven, is that even without top of the line, behind the scenes facilities, they're still contending in the Big Ten most years. They're still this year comfortably in as an at-large team. So I think there's this sort of acknowledgement that this is a winning program and it can take another step if it has more support around it.
When Will talks about his pitching plans for Omaha, it will look like what?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I'm anxious to ask Will about that. They might be talking today. I don't know. Like I could kind of see it either way. Like maybe you do start Sears on short rest again. Maybe you don't. I mean, Jackson Brockett pitched 2 innings on Saturday, so maybe he comes back on short rest as the Tuesday guy. It's an interesting spot for Nebraska, right? Because they don't have to win the Big Ten. I don't even think they have to win a game in the tournament to be kind of where they want to be in a week. So to me, I mean, I think you could keep Sears and McConaughey on somewhat normal rest. Maybe they pitch either Wednesday, Thursday, or Thursday, Friday, and you just kind of figure things out in the opener against the so-so Ohio State team and take that chance. Like, I think that's probably what I would do as opposed to getting your starting pitching, getting the rhythms off further. So I think you can piece it together. And I know that's saying a lot because they haven't been able to do that very often, but the way that Christo's been pitching and Caleb Clark's been pitching, and if you get Brockett a couple of innings, I think you can figure it out on a Tuesday in Omaha with a decent crowd behind you. But maybe they won't. Maybe they'll go the other way and really put a lot of emphasis on it and get, Sears and McConaughey starts out of the way and give them extra rest into the regional next week. So I'll be curious what they do, because it is a different situation than Nebraska's been in, right? A year ago, they had to win the tournament just to get into the NCAA. So we'll see.
Well, and with that, Evan, and by the way, you're right about Caleb Clark. Caleb Clark is a guy trending in the right direction. His last few appearances, I mean, he's looked like the guy that they wanted in that starting rotation the last couple of years. But beside that, this tournament, and you're right, they're going to go to the NCAA tournament. But if you're looking at this program that has lacked that breakthrough moment, like 2021 was great. It was a regular season title, but we saw that in 2017 as well. And unfortunately, they didn't have a Big Ten tournament that year. They were on the cusp of that same year against Arkansas, but they haven't had that breakthrough moment. If they were to be there on Sunday and win the Big Ten championship, in your opinion, on the things that this program has accomplished historically, obviously the College World Series, but also winning conference titles, which you have to go back to a tournament of 2005, would that be that breakthrough moment, in your opinion, if they could win in Omaha this week?
I think the value of them winning in Omaha would be akin to the Jackson Brockett no-hitter. Like, I think it would be really big psychologically, and maybe give them momentum heading into the NCAA tournament. But I don't know how much it would change necessarily the narrative for the season. I mean, they've finished a couple games out of first. If they get hot in Omaha, and they very well could, I think they have as good a chance to win the tournament as Illinois does. I mean, Nebraska has more pitching and better frontline starters than anybody else in the field. So especially if you're able to start 2-0, I think you're in a really good spot. But yeah, I just, it's one of those things where if they win it, people will get excited, and there's going to be big crowds on Saturday and Sunday. And it would give kind of a spotlight to the program. We talked about it before, where it seems like in the last few years, like all of their biggest moments have come on the road, whether they're clinching regular season titles and sparsely populated venues, or they're playing regionals on the road and winning away from home. So I think there'd be value just to generate excitement and momentum among the fan base to celebrate in Omaha and have that moment. But I don't know that a week of getting hot against Ohio State and Indiana and whomever else necessarily it changes sort of the paradigm for this season. So I think it'd be exciting. I think it'd be an opportunity to take that momentum into the next week. But that's probably where I'd leave it.
Evan Bland of the World-Herald joining us. So that leads me to my question, because you deal with it, and it's great that there are so many people that are passionate about Nebraska baseball. I mean, it was cultivated by Van Horn. It's kind of carried through. And Husker baseball Twitter can be a little unhinged. What would satisfy people right now on if it's a good season or not? Whether it be this year, Because I think they're good, not great, or moving forward.
Well, I mean, it's all about the end of the season, right? Like as Nick said, kind of the baseline should be being in contention for the NCAA tournament, playing meaningful baseball into May, being able to check the RPI, and in years like this, you're already an at-large team, and that's hard, right? Everyone knows about the struggles of Northern teams and starting strong, and just the importance of those first 6 weeks in a way that's not the same for the SEC or some of the warmer weather schools. But again, I think there would be value in some of this playing out in front of fans at home. Like, hosting a regional is fun in the sense of, like, hey, you had a good season and you're rewarded for it, but it's been a long time since 2008. That's a whole generation of fans and kids and students that haven't been able to show up and see the excitement of a regional. You're able to kind of check in on TV, and it's just not the same. You guys would probably agree. I think a regional weekend is one of the most exciting things in the sports calendar, when you've got 4 teams and the gamesmanship of it and just the buzz in the ballpark. Every pitch matters. Like, that's, I grew up when Nebraska was playing regionals at home, and like, those moments were exciting at that time, really exciting. And I think that's part of the reason that a lot of that passion carries over, is people do remember how fun that time was. So, hosting a regional at some point, and the program's been very open about that goal, would be valuable. And then, making a run, right? Like, they've been to the tournament a number of times since their last College World Series trip, but they haven't been back to a super since then. So find it the right draw. Hey, say Nebraska goes to Oklahoma in a week. Like, that's a team they nearly beat in mid-February. So why couldn't that team play into the second weekend? And so I think just finding a way to kind of break through that glass ceiling that's been in place since 2005, where they can't get past the opening round, would probably go a long way in sort of that next generation, seeing how exciting college baseball can be in Lincoln.
Go back to, you brought up some of the pitching and some of the guys. I mentioned Caleb Clark as a guy that I think could very well be an X factor if Nebraska needs to dig deep beyond the rotation. Is there a pitcher, whether we're talking about a closer, reliever, or someone who might have to be a stretch starter, is there somebody that you think, or you have your eye on, that could be that guy, that component, maybe that Will Walsh from a year ago, that you get just that out of the blue performance that is able to keep you around even longer?
Well, yeah, I mean, you get past Sirius and McConaughey. It still could be Brockett. It still could be Christo. Clark, like you mentioned. I mean, it could be Will Walsh again. He was someone who was a Sunday guy a month ago and has had good moments. I mean, his best pitching moment was last year in the Big Ten tournament against Michigan State, when he goes complete game shutout. So probably one of those guys, if you're talking about extended innings and figuring things out in that regard. I still think the back end of the bullpen has another step forward it can take. Jalen Worthley has been good. He could go a couple of innings late. Kyle Perry is still a 6th-year guy who when he's on is a difference maker at the back end. Kyle Frelick's been decent. Casey Dice, like, a lot of those guys are 1-inning guys, but I think, if you talk about all the struggles in the midweek this year and sort of the Sunday uncertainty, like, all of that can pay off if you find those guys this week. If so player A is comfortable in this role. Like, if you've learned that through all of these struggles in the last couple of months on those games, like, that's going to make it worth it. And teams that make runs, whether in the conference tournament or the NCAA tournament, I mean, that's going to happen. You're not able to start your aces or your top guys every time out. I mean, even LSU last year at the College World Series had one of those games where other guys step up. And so that day's coming for Nebraska. They're not going to go undefeated the rest of the way. And there's going to be that moment, whether in an elimination game or a key spot, where they are going to bring in somebody, and it's going to be somebody who maybe has potential but hasn't done it in the game. And those are going to be the moments that I think define how far Nebraska goes. And so, again, I think they've kind of figured out some of those roles in recent weeks. If they're able to apply that and it leads to something, then I think fans will probably take what happened, if that leads to a deeper run here in the next couple of weeks.
There are some of us that like runs because the chicks dig the long ball, and we'll see what the ballpark plays. Give me one guy or two, Evan, in the 1 through 9 lineup that you think is a good temperature gauge for the next couple of weeks? If they're on, the offense is on.
Caden Brumbaugh, I think at the top would be one when he's been healthy. He's a guy who's getting on base, who has sneaky speed, who really sets the table. I think Josh Overbeek would be another one. They've kind of put him either at the top or the very bottom of the lineup. And if, he's a guy who also can steal some bases, has some power, can put the ball in the gap. So he can drive guys in and get on base. It's a really interesting offense, right? Because this isn't last year's offense with Max Anderson and Bryce Matthews who are going long ball. Like this is going to be that offense that sets the table, and they're going to have to get the clutch hits. And like sometimes that feels like an oversimplification, but they do consistently get guys on base through walks or singles or whatever. And it's just a matter of, do you get that big hit? If they hit a home run, like if Tyler Stone goes deep or Ben Columbus does some yard work, like that's going to be a huge indicator that this offense is probably feeling pretty good. But it's just, it's different in the postseason where you're going up against better arms. It's harder to string together maybe 3 hits as opposed to just getting that long ball. So I guess those would be some guys that I would say it's sort of an offense where the sum of it's greater than the sum of its parts, just in terms of its production. So, we'll see. I think Riley Silva is another really interesting one. If he gets on, he really puts pressure on the defense, and Nebraska hasn't had a stolen base threat like him, in 20 years, really. So I guess I would go with those guys. It's all about the clutch hit once they're able to set it up. And I think they will be able to set it up, but can they knock it down?
Before I let you go, just the path, and for anybody who's not familiar with the bracket, it's Indiana and Purdue that are on the corresponding game if Nebraska were to beat Ohio State tomorrow. That's their side of the bracket. Then you got Illinois, Penn State, Michigan, Iowa. Do you like Nebraska's path, given the fact that they haven't played Purdue, they have played Indiana, haven't played Ohio State? As Gary mentioned, only a few teams in the tournament field that they actually played this year. But as far as the way it sets up, are you? Does that seem, I won't say favorable, but a decent path for Nebraska?
Yeah, I think so. First of all, it is quirky that every team that Nebraska didn't play is in the Big Ten tournament. That's odd. So they're going to have to do some extra scouting and things like that. But yeah, I do. I think, Ohio State probably has the least amount of star power of anybody in this field. I'm trying to do kind of like a player to watch from each team, and maybe had to reach a little bit for the Buckeyes. And that's a young program that's kind of building up still. So that's a pretty good draw. I always thought, like, if you were the first or second seed in the tournament, that'd be ideal. Getting Penn State or Ohio State, that to me is kind of that line from contenders to teams maybe that just made it in. And then Indiana, I mean, you know what you're going to see from them. They're going to slug. Yep. They're going to score runs, but who knows what their pitching situation is going to be like in a second or even a third game. Purdue, to me, still, I don't know that I totally buy what Purdue has been this year, and Illinois probably exposed some of that. So, yeah, I think that is a strong side for Nebraska. And it's like I mentioned, I mean, their pitching advantage on paper in terms of their starters and depth of pitching is clear. Like it's well ahead of maybe the rest of the field. So I do kind of like where they stand, certainly from a pitching aspect. And if the offense can do a little something and the crowd can help keep them involved, I think they have as good a chance to win and to at least make the finals as anybody.
Should be a lot of fun. Evan, we'll see you tomorrow at the Chuck.
Sounds good. Thanks, guys.
That's Evan Bland, our good Monday friend from the Omaha World.